Hello, and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look again at the Zealot Barbarian, and this time we're going to be combining it with Cleric, which in general is a pretty terrible idea, to be honest, but this kind of came around as more of a self-challenge. At the risk of losing some of you with a long introduction story, but hopefully it'll be the music one anyway. I recently had an argument with somebody where he said that Barbarian was the worst class in the game for multi-classing because they don't combine well with casters. I pointed out that there's tons of non-casters they combine with great, which means that they're probably not the worst at multi-classing. In fact, a 2-level Barbarian dip just for rage and reckless attack is pretty good on a lot of different classes. However, we started arguing more about the caster aspect because, of course, Barbarians not being able to cast or concentrate on spells while raging does limit their usefulness with casters. But I pointed out that I'd actually played a Barbarian who multiclassed with Warlock, and that guy was pretty great, honestly. I mean, granted, I mostly used my Warlock slots to either Eldritch Smite or cast Armor of Agathis, or both. So I wasn't really playing a lot of spell casting on that guy, but he was still a caster, However, my buddy pointed out that Warlocks don't really count as a full caster, at least, because they don't get the wish spell, and their spells are all weird and screwed up. Of course, Genie Pact Warlocks could get the wish spell, but I pointed out that, Clerics and Druids don't get a wish either, except for, I guess, Arcana Domain Cleric could get it. I mean, Bards don't even get it unless they take it as a magical secret, but it's not on the spell list. And, are we really going to argue that Clerics and Druids and Bards don't count as full casters, come on, don't be ridiculous. But anyways, the argument devolved into basically just nerd rage, of course, so not the most productive conversation I've ever had. But it did get me thinking about the idea of combining Barbarians with other spellcasters. And I started thinking, I really liked the idea of a Barbarian and a Cleric, and just making this like religious Zealot, which is why I wanted to do Path of the Zealot. And, in my last video, we looked at the Barbarian Paladin, which is actually a really good combination, in my opinion. Just advantage with smites, nothing to complain about ever there. This one I don't think is quite as strong because our main Cleric mechanic, of course, is spellcasting, which we're not going to be able to do in combat. We could still cast healing spells after combat, things like that, right? We've got some rituals we could be casting out of combat as well. And I do think that aspect of the game shouldn't really be overlooked. Barbarians tend to be really, really good at combat and not very good at anything else, which, in my opinion, is a real problem with the class. Like, they can be okay in the exploration pillar, I guess, as well. But the fact is that so many other classes just destroy them even in the exploration pillar. They're not particularly exceptional at it, right? And I think that, once you've got those first 5 or 6 levels of Barbarian, and, after that you're just getting, you're getting some nice abilities, you're getting brutal criticals and stuff like that, but you've really got the core of your class already established. And sure, I might not be as good in combat by multi-classing as a pure Barbarian would be, but I'm going to be way better at other things, and I don't think that's necessarily the worst choice ever. I do often talk about how, in my opinion, one of the weaker reasons to multi-class is to gain more utility, because you're usually better off just dominating in one of the pillars of play and then, let your allies handle the other pillars of play. And I still absolutely 100% believe that, but I do think that, it doesn't have to always be that. And that got me thinking about different domains that we could combine with Barbarian that might have something to offer. And I'm not looking to take a lot of Cleric, probably. I think level 6 would probably be as high as I'd go in some of these. Maybe 8 if I was getting if I wanted the extra D8 damage or something added to my melee attacks or martial attacks. They're not melee specific. Maybe. But the fact is, there's no point raging if I've got 5th or 6th level spells, right? That's just, the higher level you go, the more the spell casting matters more and just really becomes to dominate the game. And, I kind of wanted something where I could look at maybe a 1 or 2 level Cleric dip just to, kind of add a bit, or maybe 3 levels if I wanted a bit more spell casting type of stuff, right? Like I said, maybe 6 if I'm really looking to add in some specific features of a particular domain, but, you know, I was looking at like limited Cleric with, you know, that big Barbarian core, right? So I'm going to start Barbarian, get to 5, get extra attack, and then we were even going to go to Barbarian 6, depending on, you know, if we really wanted the particular subclass features, or then go into Cleric for a little bit, and then, you know, probably go back to Barbarian. So there were some that I think are honorable mentions, right? So we're going to be looking at the path of the Zealot again, because, like I said, we're trying to make a Zealot. But I do think that it's worth mentioning the Storm Herald and Tempest Cleric has some interesting synergy where you can just push people around the battlefield. This was a really strong combination before we started getting feats like telekinesis, and, you know, now there's tons of forced movement everywhere, and so it's not really as rare as it used to be, but, you know, still an interesting combination. I think the Ancestral Guardian has some cool thematic ideas that fit well with a lot of Cleric subclasses, and it is a little more defensively oriented than some of the others, where, you know, you can give enemies disadvantage to attack your allies, kind of keeping them focused on you. That's pretty nice. And you can even get an ability where you can use a reaction at level 6 to reflect damage back when an ally does get hit, which I think is pretty cool as well. Unfortunately, one of the domains I wanted to look at, though, is the Peace Domain Cleric. And since that's going to be using our reaction pretty regularly, I don't think Ancestral Guardian is really going to be the perfect fit for me. Other Cleric domains that we might want to look at, though, besides Tempest, of course. Forge is definitely worth mentioning as a 1 or 2 level Cleric dip. 1 level can give us the ability to enchant our weapon, and that's kind of a big deal, especially in some campaigns, right? And especially if maybe you've got a dungeon master who's running like a pre-made adventure, and you're using something like a Maul because you took, you know, Great Weapon Mastery plus the Crusher feat or something, you know? And maybe your DM doesn't like to reskin weapons, you know? You get that +1 short sword that nobody in the party wants, and you're like, can we just make it a Maul? And he's like, no, it's a short sword. And you're like, darn it. That's okay, I'll just go back to doing half damage to everything we fight again. You know, so being able to enchant your own weapons is actually pretty awesome. It's also really good even at higher levels if you're in like a low magic campaign. I don't think we necessarily need a lot of Forge, but like I said, you know, 1 level, pretty good. Now, I think the Death Domain Cleric has some potential. You can get additional damage added to one of your melee attacks. It's only once per short rest, though. It starts at level 2. You do get like the Animate Dead spell as well, which I should point out does not require concentration. So, you know, if your table doesn't mind you having a bunch of undead running around slowing the game down, then that does become a pretty useful spell to have, actually. You know, so there is that. Another one that I kind of wanted to mention was the War Cleric. And I know War Cleric gets a bad reputation. I kind of feel like it's on the weaker side as well. The problem with War Cleric is that they're just not good enough at the war aspect. I really wish they just got extra attack, like Valor Bards and Swords Bards and, I guess, Warlocks if they went Pact of the Blade, and Blade Singer Wizards, you know. Even if you give it to them at like 6 or 7 or something like that, you know, 6 would make them on par with the Bards and the, you know, and the Wizard one. So, the Blade Singer. I really think that it would have gone a long way to helping them out. The problem with War Cleric is you get that bonus action attack a limited number of times a day. And like when you're, you know, level 1 or 2 or even 4, that ability is actually pretty good because everybody else only has 1 attack around. Now, yeah, they could do wield or something like that, but so could you, you know. They could have pull on mastery, but so could you, you know. Point is, you know, that fighter with his great sword and you with your great sword, you each have 1 attack around, but limited number of times a day, you can make a second attack using a bonus action. The problem is, though, that once you hit level 5, that fighter just always can make a second attack using his bonus action, or using his regular action, sorry. not even using his bonus action. And that leaves his bonus action free for other things. So he just permanently has 2 attacks now. And eventually he'll have 3 and maybe even 4. Plus he's got action surge and everything else, right? Whereas you still have that 1 attack around only, and a limited number of times a day, you can also make a second attack with your bonus action. And so getting an extra attack 2 or 3 times a day was good when nobody else had that option. But now that it's the only thing you have, it's just not very good. But it can work well with certain builds. Like let's say we went with Great Weapon Mastery, we decided to use a Maul or a Great Sword, something like that. We're not going to be taking Polearm Mastery because that's going to be using our bonus action all the time. But let's say we just wanted to use Great Weapon Mastery and we're on a Barbarian. We're probably going to rage in that first round, but because we have Great Weapon Mastery, we can make bonus action attacks if we get a killing blow or a crit. But the thing is, that's not always going to happen. There will be rounds when we were already raging and we didn't get a kill or a crit. And then we might be like, hey, I can only make 2 extra attacks with my wisdom a day, but why not make one of them here, right? And we can just use it to kind of like fill in those little gaps when we didn't have another attack there. Yeah, that's actually not too bad. And it will give us rage damage, right? Because we're still raging, you know, so that attack's also going to hit a little harder, just like any other attack we made would have. I don't think that's too bad. Taking 2 levels so we can give ourselves a plus 10. Again, not terrible. Channel Divinity is not a spell. We can use that while we're raging and it's going to be fine. And if we're using Great Weapon Mastery, that -5 hit penalty, even with Reckless Attack, it will cause us to miss sometimes. So, you know, having that in our back pocket as an ability we can use isn't so bad. But the one I really like the most, of course, is one of the most overpowered cleric options we have, and that is the Peace Domain Cleric. Ugh, what were they thinking? Anyways, so let's take a look at the Peace Domain a little more specifically. So at level 1, we're going to get Implement of Peace. We gain proficiency in Insight, Performance, or Persuasion, our choice. Now, obviously, this is not what's going to make us overpowered, especially since 2 of those 3 skills use Charisma, and we're already needing Wisdom for Cleric and Strength for Barbarian, and probably some Constitution. We're probably not going to have a great Charisma score, if I was just to take a wild guess. But Insight's Wisdom, so we could choose that. But we also get the Emboldening Bond feature at level 1. So as an action, you choose a number of willing creatures within 30 feet of you, this can also include yourself, equal to your proficiency bonus. You create a magical bond among them for 10 minutes or until you use this feature again. When any bonded creature within 30 feet of you, or while any bonded creature is within 30 feet of another, a creature can roll a d4 and add the number roll to an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw it makes. Each creature can add the d4 no more than once per turn. You can use it a number of times, you get a proficiency bonus, and you gain all of them when you take a long rest. So, basically, this is going to give us the ability to essentially use like a combination of guidance and bless, where it's a saving throw or an attack roll or an ability check. But unlike, say, bless, which is going to apply to every one of those rolls you're making as long as the spell is in play, you're only getting to choose 1 time per turn when you can use that ability. So, not as strong, but also not a spell, and not using your concentration. So, there is that. And I do like the fact that, you know, you're able to like kind of help buff your allies in this ability. And remember, it's not within 30 feet of you. It's as long as any of the bonded creatures are in 30 feet of another bonded creature. So they can like chain off each other all across the battlefield. It also scales with our proficiency bonus, not based on our cleric levels. This is pretty strong already, just being able to, you know, buff our allies this way and, you know, give them an extra d4. And let's remember, like, if I use a d4 for an attack, let's say, right? I can only use it once per turn. But if I'm being forced to make a saving throw, that's probably not going to be on my turn. So there's a very strong possibility that I might be using this twice per round or more, depending on how many saving throws I'm making from how many different sources, you know, per per round of combat, I could be using it 2-3 times, right? A lot of those are going to be defensive for saving throws, not probably what I was hoping to do, make a bunch of saving throws. Yes. Words never spoken. But, you know, it does have a lot of impact on a battle. We all know how good Bless can be, you know, no need to go in further. Anyways, we also get our Channel Divinity at level 2, just like everybody else. As an action, you can move up to your speed without provoking opportunity attacks, and when you move within 5 feet of any other creature during this action, you can restore a number of hit points to that creature equal to 2d6 plus your wisdom modifier. A creature can receive this healing only once whenever you take this action. So you can heal multiple people, but you can only heal each of them one time with that action. I really wish this didn't take an action, because just having a barbarian who could move and attack and then like reposition themselves on the battlefield without creating opportunity attacks would be amazing. But it does require your action, which is unfortunate. But, you know, there are times when you might not have enough movement to get into combat anyway, and you might, you know, wanted to, or you killed the target you were on, and now you got to get across the battlefield, and maybe you're just like, yeah, instead of dashing, I'll just move my movement speed, still not get into combat, heal a bunch of people on the way though, and then next round I can get there, right? You know, there are chances when this might be good. Just repositioning yourself without giving opportunity attacks isn't the worst thing in the world, but overall this is a Channel Divinity that I'm probably not going to get a lot of use out of. So if I'm only looking for 1 or 2 levels of Cleric, this one's probably not going to be the one I'm going to look at. Although, I should have mentioned Twilight Domain Cleric. I can't believe I forgot Twilight Domain Cleric. Twilight Domain is also a worthy consideration. Just throwing out, you know, temporary hit points while you're raging every round. That is an insane combination, and definitely one that I should have mentioned in more detail. Maybe we'll come back to that one. But then we got the level 6 ability. So, the bond you forge between people helps them to protect each other. When a creature affected by your emboldening bond feature is about to take damage, a second bonded creature within 30 feet of the first can use its reaction to teleport to an unoccupied space within 5 feet of the first creature. The second creature then takes all the damage instead. So, just as an example, your wizard is about to get crushed because somebody hit him for a ton of damage. You or the fighter or somebody else within 30 feet of your wizard uses your reaction, teleports next to the wizard, and then take all the damage instead. This ability is absolutely insane. It really allows players to basically just pool all their health together and then just split it up as they need. And especially for you, where you can teleport to somebody else while you're raging and take half damage from, you know, physical attacks, it's insanely good. The only real limitations is that it's requiring everybody to use their reaction. So it's not like a true hit point pool would have been, where you can just divide it infinitely. You are limited to, you know, the range considerations and, you know, whether or not you have a reaction available to be able to take the damage, right? But overall, that ability is pretty insane, especially on a frontliner who might want to be raging and making that damage just cut down by half, you know? Now it's not, even if they're not hitting you, you're taking half the damage for your allies. It's pretty good. I like it quite a bit. However, that one is one of the bigger investments for Cleric, right? So if you're going to 6 levels, you know, that is a lot of spell casting that you're only going to be doing out of combat for the most part. But that's not necessarily the worst thing ever. You know, I do talk about in my multiclassing videos that I have 3 reasons to multiclass. Reason number 3 is to gain more utility. And the reason it's only 3rd instead of 1st or 2nd is because, generally speaking, you want to be really dominant in one particular aspect of the game and then let your allies be dominant in other aspects. You don't have to be great at everything, right? In fact, usually trying to be great at everything means you end up being average at everything instead. And you're way better off just dominating in one pillar of play. And barbarians already tend to dominate in the combat pillar. But that is kind of one of the frustrations with barbarians sometimes, is that you just don't really do anything else except for just wait for the DM to say, roll initiative, and then you get to shine, right? But you're not really contributing much outside of combat. And the other problem with Barbarian is that really after the first 5 or 6 levels or so, they do tend to slow down quite a bit. You get some abilities like brutal criticals that can be nice when you actually get a crit, but when you're not getting crit, it's not doing anything, you know? And they just have a lot of abilities like that, which tend to be, you know, allowing you to like reroll saving throws and things like that. A lot of things which are very circumstantial and don't just, you know, make you better at combat. Like pretty much most of your combat stuff, I'd say 80% of it you had by level 6 probably when you got your, you know, second subclass feature, right? So, you know, if you're kind of maxing out or hitting diminishing returns, maybe not maxing out, but diminishing returns by level 6, and you don't really do anything outside of combat, it's not the worst option to be able to add more non-combat role and purpose to your character. So anyways, Twilight Domain, of course. So we also get Eyes of Night, which allows us to have dark vision out to a range of 300 feet. Perfect if you wanted to go variant human or custom lineage and don't have dark vision, but wanted great weapon mastery right at level 1. Want to do that and, you know, then add in some dark vision on top of that. As an action, you can magically share the dark vision with other willing creatures you can see within 10 feet of you, up to a number of creatures up to your wisdom modifier. The shared dark vision lasts for 1 hour. Once you share it, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest, or unless you expend a spell slot of any level to share it again, which is not so bad because you might not be doing a lot of your spell slots anyways. We also get Vigilant Blessing. As an action, you give one creature you touch, possibly including yourself, advantage on the next initiative roll the creature makes. This benefit ends immediately after the roll or if you use this feature again. This is also pretty nice because there's no limit to how many times you can do it. So going into combat, either you or somebody in your party should always have advantage on that initiative roll. And this is pretty good just for one level, especially if you didn't already have dark vision. But even if you did, you don't have 300 feet on any of your races normally. So, you know, already pretty good abilities. But of course, the real reason why you wanted to go Twilight was probably for your channel divinity. As an action, you present your holy symbol, and a sphere of twilight emanates from you. The sphere is centered on you, has a 30-foot radius, and is filled with dim light. The sphere moves with you and lasts for 1 minute, or until you are incapacitated or die. Whenever a creature, including you, ends its turn in the sphere, you can grant that creature one of these benefits. You grant it temporary hit points equal to 1d6 plus your cleric level. You end one effect on it, causing it to be charmed or frightened. Yeah. You're a barbarian who can just give yourself, and everybody else around you, but yourself, temporary hit points every single round while raging. It does use your action, which is very unfortunate, but, you know, still pretty good. And if you figured, you know, if you like time it right, you could rage as your bonus action while making sure you've got like 6 enemies around you. And hopefully, you know, as long as one of them hits you, you're going to be able to maintain your rage even though you didn't attack on your turn, right? And, you know, then you've got temporary hit points coming in, and now you just start crushing everybody with your great weapon, possibly using, you know, a maul, for example, with the crusher feat, or whatever else you took, right? Just ridiculous. You can also fly at level 6, but I probably wouldn't take this one that high. I did want to make a note at the end, looking at some lower level spells where you can cast them without needing concentration, so that if you're raging, they can still persist. And, you know, at least as a good generic list of low-level spells, these are some pretty decent ones. Obviously, we have Aid. Aid is pretty handy since it doesn't increase, or since it increases, your actual hit points. It doesn't give you temporary hit points, so it stacks like, you know, with our Twilight Domain Cleric and things like that, right? Spiritual Weapon. Obviously, we're not going to be casting it in combat if we were already raging, but we could have cast it before combat. You know, we kill the guards outside the throne room who desperately try to stop us from opening the doors, and we're like, something tells me the big fight with the bad, evil king is about to happen. So, spiritual weapon, you know, and then we go into the fight. It doesn't require concentration, so our spiritual weapon is just there for the whole fight. I already mentioned Animate Dead. This is really only going to apply if you're Death Domain Cleric, otherwise it won't be on your spell list. There is Warding Bond, which can be pretty handy as well, since, you know, if you're raging, pretty good. A couple of spells that are a little higher level, but I mentioned. One of them is Death Ward. You would have to get to level 7 Cleric. But I think if you went Peace Domain and you really wanted Death Ward, one more level wouldn't be the worst thing ever, especially if you know, we could add it on later, right? We're not going to be rushing right to get it. But it's not bad, you know. Guardian of Faith, no concentration there. That can be pretty handy. Just, you know, nothing wrong with that spell either. So I do think there are some interesting options. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be like the strongest casting build because we're a barbarian. So, you know, why would we expect to really be good at casting? That just seems like an unrealistic expectation to me. So once again, I think a lot of this is framing and how we look at this particular character, right? Don't think of it as adding some, you know, rage to your cleric, preventing you from casting all spells. Think of it as adding a bit of stuff to your barbarian. And I do think that in this case, I am going to take most of my levels in barbarian, right? Like, you know, that's just the way I'm going to build it. Most of the clerics I wanted to look at only needed a couple levels of cleric to be able to give me something good that I thought would be valuable. Now, if the campaign goes all the way to 20 and I lose out of my barbarian capstone, that would kind of suck because barbarian capstone is one of the best capstones in the entire game, right? But the truth is, that's probably not what we're going to be looking at in most of the campaigns. Let's say you go to like 10th or 11th level. Having 2 levels of Twilight Domain Cleric is actually pretty good on a 9th level Barbarian. You know, like it just is. Like I said, giving ourselves magic weapons from Forge or giving ourselves, you know, like, you know, whatever else it might have been. I think that there's enough there that you can find some interesting combinations. And like I said, then you also have got some ritual spells you could potentially be casting. You've got some out of combat healing you can do. You've got other things you can be casting or doing with your barbarian when you're not in combat, and you know, not just sitting there waiting for the DM to say roll initiative and then feeling like, oh, time to wake up, combat started. And that tends to be what happens with a lot of barbarians. So anyways, I'm not saying this is the most powerful idea ever or anything like that, but I did think it was definitely at least worth talking about, and it was kind of an interesting thought experiment, if nothing else. I haven't played any of these characters in a campaign, except for the Barbarian Warlock that I mentioned earlier, but that's, you know, not a cleric, right? So, you know, keep that in mind. But like I said, I think that all of them are pretty doable. The fact that Channel Divinity can work even while raging and stuff. You do have some interesting spells you could potentially using out of combat. You do have all the functionality of a barbarian still. And like I said, you can grab a magic weapon, you can grab extra attacks. If you want to go war, you know, you could grab the hit points from the Twilight Domain. You could be pooling your hit points together and splitting the damage between you all from Peace Domain. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas that all combine usually pretty nicely with the rage mechanic to just really allow your barbarian to even last even longer. Like, let's face it, like a 9th level barbarian is probably going to be less durable than a 7th level barbarian, 2nd level Twilight Cleric. Like, it's probably true. You know, the hit points you lost by taking a couple levels of Cleric are nothing compared to the temporary hit points every single round. Now again, maybe you already had a Twilight Domain Cleric, in which case Twilight Domain probably wasn't the strongest of choices for you to make because, you know, that role was already covered, right? But, you know, I do think that it's an interesting combination. So anyways, that's everything for this video. I'm already starting to ramble, I think. So we're going to finish it up there. Anyways, as always, feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, you know, all the typical YouTube stuff. But most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I would love to hear other people's comments and combinations for like Cleric and Barbarian, or even Cleric and Fighter and some of these others. I really like a lot of themed characters, and the idea of this like religious barbarian zealot who's actually also a cleric of their god, it just really appeals to me on like a thematic sense, you know? And like I said, it might not be the most optimized build out there. I'm fully aware of that. But I still feel like if you've got great weapon mastery and you're a barbarian, you're probably going to be pretty fine, especially if you've got, temporary hit points every round or a magic weapon when nobody else has one or whatever else, right? So I do think that it's still pretty decently strong, and I like the ability that we can add some further out-of-combat utility to a class that is, historically lacking in anything except for combat. Anyways, that's everything. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.